Hello, people. How are you doing? 8:01, and you're listening to Matt Phillips on the Sports Therapy Association podcast. It is recorded live, so if you're new to the podcast, then that's why you're going to hear me bringing things up on screen, and I will try to explain what is on the screen. But if you want to join us live and see the recording and be able to ask the guests directly, then just head along to YouTube channel, the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel on Tuesdays at 8 o'clock UK time. Okay, and then you can join us for the live recording. We like it live because it makes it more spontaneous. I was just talking to our guest. We get questions which we haven't heard before, and it just, I think, makes a more interesting podcast at the end of it. But if you can't join us that time, that's fine, and we welcome you downloading the podcast. It's very nice. The only thing we do request, if you do enjoy what you hear, then just leave a little rating. 5 will be fine, and a comment or something, because it just helps the good word of our guests reach more people, because you get higher in the Google searches. So that'd be amazing. If you're using an iPhone, it's simple, it takes 10 seconds. If you're using an Android, it's a bit more complicated. I think it's still their iTunes or something. But iPhone users, all 61% of you, I think, that'd be great if you just leave a rating. Anyway, so here we are. Tuesday night, it's episode 117 of the Sports Therapy Association podcast. And what we're doing now, in full swing of September, is we're starting a countdown to Therapy Expo 2022, which is taking place on November the 23rd and the 24th at the NEC Birmingham, where it has taken place for this will be the 8th year in Birmingham, I think, in a couple of years in Manchester. I think that's right. So if you're not aware of the events, you can get full details. Just type in Therapy Expo 2022 into Google, and I first went there, I think, in 2014. I spoke in 14, 15, 16, and then I didn't speak anymore because I don't know, I just got asked to kind of talk about injury instead of pain, and at that time that wasn't a great question to say to me. Nowadays we kind of understand that you can't talk about one without the other, and it's all very much caught up, and it's really nice to be back. I think I was a little bit premature in 2014 trying to say what I was saying, but it's all good now, and I really do wholeheartedly, and you know me, very evidence informed. I think it's a great progressive expo, an event to attend in no small amount, because the Sports Therapy Association has its own STA Theatre in there, and this year, like last year, we've got 2 days of fantastic speakers bringing you presentations from 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon on both the Wednesday and the Thursday. So what we're going to be doing basically between now and November, mid-November, is bringing you the speakers themselves to have a little chat about who they are, in case you're not aware of what they do, highlight their websites and what they offer, and talk a little bit about what they're going to be presenting, to give you an idea of whether you want to put that in your diary. Last week we talked to Liam Richardson, who's the manager of content at Therapy Expo at Closer Still Media, and I think he said something like 70 presentations going on for you to choose from, in like 8 hours. So do the maths, you can't see everybody, impossible. So it might be useful if you have a little listen now, or to the next few episodes, and see whether you definitely want to pinpoint some of them, mark them in your diary. So you can hear that last week's episode with, like I say, Liam Richardson, content manager at Therapy Expo, or you can watch it on YouTube, or you can listen to it on all popular podcast apps. And you can also see it and read all the show notes at thesta.co.uk. There we go. Right. So before I bring the guest up for tonight, welcome people who are joining us live. I really love the fact that people do join us live, and I think it's like testimony to people trying to maintain that live aspect to our life. Everything now is just catch up, isn't it? So I really appreciate it. And when you do join us live, then I can bring your messages up onto the screen. So Gary Benson, founder of the STA, is here. Good evening all, he says. Hope you're keeping well. Welcome back, Gary. That's the other Gary Mendoza, Dr Gary Mendoza, who's our guest, waiting patiently in the lobby. Really looking forward to this one, as are a lot of people. And thank you for your comments on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. It's lovely to hear that you're looking forward to listening to Dr. Gary Mendoza. Catherine Rhyme is in the house saying hi, everyone. Hi, Catherine. Marco Mendonca is here as well. How are you doing, Marco? Becky Carroll is obviously in here. And again, replicating what we are all thinking. Very much looking forward to seeing Gary Mendoza at the Expo. Definitely. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Catherine Rhyme is saying, me too, Becky. Ivan Ward is here. Hi, Ivan. And Lindsay Penn is here. And people are still all flocking in. So if you listen to the podcast and you fancy, you got Tuesday night free, UK time, 8 o'clock, come along. You don't have to be an STA member, but it gives you a really nice chance to network, have a chat, as well as ask our fantastic guests questions direct. Right, I've left him down in the lobby for long enough. Really looking forward to what's going to happen now. We're talking about Dr. Gary Mendoza, who's going to be at the STA Theatre at Therapy Expo, 11:30 a.m. on day 2 in the STA Theatre. Also going to be there on Wednesday as well in Theatre B. So you've got 2 days chance to catch him. With us, he's going to be talking about understanding your client's behaviour change journey. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's bring Dr. Gary Mendoza up. Hey Gary, how you doing?
Hi Matt, thanks for inviting us on.
No, mate, thank you very much for coming along. This is your 3rd time now. You've already entered elite rankings now, 3 appearances. So I appreciate you giving up your time. For people who aren't aware, Gary was here back in, so I think it was May, with Nutrition, Mind Over Matter. But originally, first appearance was, well, a year ago now, August 2021, with episode 64, which was Motivational Interviewing for Client Communication. So pretty much a year ago, you first came to Gary. So it's really great to have you back. And for people who aren't aware of you, which is really the people I want to reach, maybe they don't know about stagesofchange.co.uk, your website. How would you I know it's tricky, but how would you sum up what stagesofchange.co.uk is and the services you offer? And in particular, how is it useful to soft tissue therapists?
I think, well, primarily I kind of offer training in behaviour change and different aspects of behaviour change, as well as applied nutrition for personal trainers, but and for therapists as well, if you're kind of giving your clients any type of broad overview of what their nutrition should look like. I think more and more therapists are realizing that it's not just about what they do when they've got their clients there, although obviously that is majorly important, but actually not just what they're doing, but what they're saying, because the way you're communicating with that client will impact on whether they follow through with any maybe follow-up treatment that you're suggesting, or exercise or whatever that you're suggesting they do during the week in between visits with you. So certainly with physiotherapists, there'll be certain exercises they give out that they need the client to do on a daily basis, and then they carry on their more remedial therapy when they see them maybe every couple of weeks or whatever. But very often they find that a lot of clients, it's very obvious to them when they come back that they just haven't been doing whatever they've said they would do. And the reason behind that is they really haven't facilitated the behavior change at a psychological level for that client. So as they go away, really just understanding why it is so important that they do it and why they're committed to doing it. So that's kind of the area I'm really interested in, is, and you get your clients to do what they actually say they might do.
Do you think, I'm hoping, I mean, we're on like episode 117 now, and I reckon probably I'd bet that in 60 or 70 of those we've now mentioned the importance of communication and how words matter, and we've had lots of episodes just dedicated to that, words matter. Is it something which, you've been doing this a while, is it getting better now? I mean, I think you said therapists are starting to wise up that what comes out of the mouth is important as well as what they do with their hands. Is it getting better, or is it my imagination?
I think the awareness of it is getting better, but whether people are getting better at doing it is another matter, because
Brilliant.
It's like, yeah, I know a lot of people think I'm a really good communicator. I mean, I did before I ever learned motivational interviewing. I thought, well, I've been a personal trainer 30 odd years. I must be quite good at talking to people. Otherwise they wouldn't stay with me. But I think when I learned motivational interviewing, it made me realize, God, my communication could be so much better. And the funny thing was, learning motivational interviewing kind of 6 months, a year down the line, even my wife, and I've been married 41, 42 years nearly. And even she said to me, she said, God, you listen now. And I'm like, did I not always then?
Well, that's a good testimony. Stick that on the website. If you watch since you listen, that's amazing. I've just, for those of you listening to the podcast, you missed out on the glory of seeing me nearly spit out my tea, because I've just remembered now, there will be just just things you want to write down here, which Gary will say just off the cuff, which just in 7 words will just make something so clear. So what you just said there is just brilliant. People are aware now, but whether they can actually do it is another topic. And that just kind of sums up exactly what your website and everything is about, giving people the skills now. Because it's something we talked about before. In therapy, traditionally, there is no mention. I would go to say, I'm not sure about at degree level, but definitely below degree level, there isn't really any modules on communication or even educating. It's all manual therapy, exercise prescription. Why is that?
I mean, I think that's true. And that's not just therapy either. I mean, that is true of most nutrition degrees, most dietetic degrees. And yet there are two professions that their primary role is going to be communicating, trying to get their clients to take on board information. And yet we don't give them any skills in doing them. In fact, I now work at Bath Spa, and they get 4 hours on doing consultations. And when you think that a nutritionist day in, day out will be doing consultations, 4 hours in a 3-year degree is, well, you're paying lip service to it, really. Excuse the pun.
It's very good. It's very well put. Again, again, in our episodes, we've talked about now how the subjective is so important. I've heard you talking about it. The client will give you the answers if you listen to them enough. And that's mentioned now, depending on the teacher, because a lot of teachers are still very keen to get to all of those objective tests and all these clever ways of telling whether they've got a meniscal issue or testing tendons and palpation. But it's still, as far as I know, in a lot of syllabi, it's not dealt on enough in how to have a successful subjective. I guess that's something where you really dip in and help people get the most out of the time they're spending on the subjective assessment.
Yeah, and it's not just what you say is absolutely crucial, but it's actually learning to listen. Because I think there is one of the things we're all kind of blessed with, but cursed with as well, is your writing reflex. And that's when you're an expert in a field and somebody says something and you think, that's not right. No, what you want to do is da, 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 and you just jump straight in there. And we've all got that as professionals, but it's learning to control it and think, is that really appropriate that I bring that out now? Or should I listen a bit more to what my client's telling me? Because ultimately I'll get a lot more from that than I will just spouting a load of facts at them and saying, oh, you want to do this, you want to do that. And Bill Miller, who's one of the founders of motivational interviewing, one of his favorite sayings is sometimes all a person needs is a good listening to.
Brilliant.
And it's so true.
That's great. That's just a t-shirt in the making there. What you need is a really good listening to. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned motivational interviewing. I've kind of mentioned this a lot, but I think it's just because it's so important. Because if I didn't know about it and I saw it on a tin or saw it on a website or someone was kind of talking in the background, oh, I saw something really interesting on motivational interviewing. It does sound like, I don't know, technique to get your job at an interview, doesn't it? Or ways to find the right member of staff. It's unfortunate, and we've talked about this before. But yeah, how can you clarify that? What is motivational interviewing?
Motivational interviewing, in a nutshell, it's a way really of having a useful conversation that facilitates a client's desire to want to change. It was primarily designed by William Miller and Stephen Rollnick, initially in addictive behaviors, and helping people that maybe didn't want to change or at least ambivalent about it. And the whole purpose of it was to have a conversation in such a way that by the end of that conversation, the individual had found their own reasons for maybe why it might be beneficial for them to change. And so for want of a better word, it's a cozy chat that's got purpose and direction. It's a simple way to look at it.
Yeah. And it's something which we're just not all inherently born with. Like you say, our natural instinct a lot of the time, particularly when we become professionals in something, is to blurt out the answer and looking for the solution and sort of say it. But is that something you do have to learn a lot of the time?
There are lots of facets in motivational interviewing that we all do from time to time, but maybe don't realize that's what we're doing. But ultimately, I would say the skills you use in motivational interviewing do not come naturally to anyone, not in the way that you would use them. Because one of the things I always say at the start of my workshop when people are learning motivational interviewing is, you've all been communicating for 20, 30, 40 years, depending on how old you are. And now I'm going to tell you, you've been doing it wrong. You need to do it this way. You're going to have to learn a new way to communicate. Now, for some people, there'll be facets that they do naturally. And so they're just learning a different part. So the key kind of areas are active listening. So learning to listen in such a way that you are really paying attention to everything that the client is saying. And I do mean everything, literally in terms of the words they're using. So that's one thing. Reflective listening. So being able to listen and then give that content back to the client, maybe slightly reworded in a slightly different way, paraphrase, whatever. There are different types of reflections. And for most of us, we tend not to reflect when we have a conversation. And then I would say the third thing that people normally need to get comfortable with is giving people a bit of space. Normally what will happen in a conversation is I'll say something, you'll respond. I'll wait till you, the minute you stop talking, I'll say something else, or possibly even cut across you, because that happens from time to time. And one of the things you have to learn is to slow everything down, be calm, and don't be afraid of a little bit of silence at the end. And in the context of motivational interviewing, silence really is golden, because often if you leave a gap when your client stops speaking, they won't be comfortable with it, and neither will you. You'll be like, oh, I really should say something now. But because you don't say anything, the client thinks, oh, he's expecting me to say something else. And so then they'll blurt something else out. And very often, whatever comes out at that point will have come from the subconscious. So generally when we respond in a conversation, it's conscious. We're just like, oh, this is what I would say to that. This is what I would say to that. But if you've used all that conscious response and now you're thinking, oh, what do I say now? You kind of have to access your subconscious. And really it's the subconscious we want to get to, because that's running the show. And so that learning to leave a bit of space and being comfortable with a slower pace of conversation, that takes real practice.
I love that. I think about that. I think I'm not exaggerating, on a daily basis, and not just with clients, with friends, with family, even with my children, with my wife, definitely. It's just that you want to say something, but just give it a couple of seconds, because that opens the door, doesn't it? It's beautiful. The way you put it is just, it's so true. And yeah, I mean, I'm very impressed with, I'm just going to bring up your website a sec, because I want people to know that there's an awful lot. I mean, this is just a giveaway on your website. If people listen to the podcast, I'm bringing up a screenshot now of stagesofchange.co.uk. If you go along to there, there's some information about Gary, nice photo on the front. And if you click along, you'll find, for example, there's a video which is nearly an hour long called the Action Behaviour Change Strategy. And it's so worth a listen. You don't have to do it all in one go. Don't let that put you off. Don't let that become a barrier. Just think, oh, I might listen to 10 minutes of that. And it just explains so much. And you'll just be nodding and going, I can relate to that. I get that. And it's free. Once again, we're talking about CPD. People saying, what should I do? Well, here you go. If you're looking for something to do to improve yourself, there's 50 minutes of it on stagesofchange.co.uk. And also on there, you'll find loads of details about, once you do understand what it is, then you can have a little look at what you think might be applicable for you in terms of courses and things. It's not just about behavioral change. If you're particularly in nutrition, which is one of Gary's many specialities, then there's mentoring and things and courses for that, and then personal growth. So there's something there for everyone. Once again, no such thing as the perfect CPD for everybody. It's all about just finding something which suits you. So it's a great website, and I recommend that you definitely go along and have a little look. There we go. Just needed to get that in there because there's so much information on there, Gary. Do you find you're having to update it quite a lot or change things?
Not so much change as add to it, I think. I'm forever thinking of something else. I think, oh, that'd be quite useful if I put that up there. So the resources section on my website has got, I don't know, so much free stuff. It's daft, really, but I love getting it out there.
No, it's great. It's worth going to. And then there is possibilities of becoming a member and all sorts of stuff. And like I say, the courses. So go and check it out, people, if this is the podcast. I've got a question here. Don't forget, people as well, live people, if you're joining us, then feel free to ask questions. Becky Carroll has admitted, which is the first stage. I think we'll talk about that later on. Once you can admit you're making a mistake, she says, "I'm a nightmare for finishing people's sentences." Some people are, isn't it? It's beautiful, just embracing variety out there. Some people do it all the time, and it just can really be grating. Not for you, Becky. You can interrupt me anytime you want. Becky will be along at Therapy Expo, and I recommend spending at least 20 minutes with her, Gary.
Well, make sure you say hi when you come along.
Oh, I can pretty much guarantee she will. You'll recognise it because you'll probably have your T-shirt on, just a big Gary head on a T-shirt, so you'll spot Becky. And also Catherine Reimer here, who said, was also, I think, is going to be at Therapy Expo this year. Catherine says, remembering to leave pauses is sometimes the hardest. I've learned to reflect a bit more now to also find that I've also understood what the client has said. Okay, yeah, so checking, you really get, not feeling embarrassed if you haven't understood something. That's interesting, actually. Now you've said that, Catherine, understood what they're talking about, because maybe it's a bit jumbled, which especially people in pain, it often is. You're a bit embarrassed because you don't want to show that you haven't understood what they said. So you might be tempted just to gloss over and think, I'll work it out later. Is that a scenario where, you can get them to say the information again, but without feeling embarrassed that you haven't understood it?
I would say not so much get them to say it again, but one of the things you do, one of the types of reflection, a simple reflection is just repeat what the client said. You might swap the order of the words or whatever, but pretty much it's what the client said. But complex reflections give you real scope. And so one of the easiest ones I often say to trainers is complete the paragraph or take a punt at what you think they mean. So if you think you understand, give the client, so you kind of go back to the client. Well, what I understand from that is that you've got da, 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 da. If you've got it spot on, the client's going to think, wow, this guy really gets me. And that's perfect. But if you've got it wrong, the client will just correct you. Oh no, what I really meant was da, 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 da. And so that is the beauty of reflections, because without a reflection, if you look at Thomas Gordon's model of communication, the way we communicate is I'm sat here now and I'm thinking about what I want to say. So now I put that into a sentence. I speak it now. You hear that sentence and you will put your own meaning on it. Now, generally, that's where we leave communication, because we then just normally respond and away we go. The problem with that is we haven't closed. And so it closes the loop of communication and makes sure there's no misunderstanding. And where there's lack of understanding, it helps close that as well.
Brilliant. Love that. And our biggest fear, the client kind of getting a bit upset or frustrated that you haven't quite understood what they said. I imagine it's all in our head. If anything, they're flattered you're taking the time out to check, what they said is right.
If anything, it actually builds empathy with the client. Because if you demonstrate that you are really trying to understand what they are saying, you build empathy. And we know from research in motivational interviewing with addictive behaviors that empathic coaches get the best results, regardless of their level of expertise, their level of experience, whatever. Empathy is the biggest single predictor of a positive outcome for a client.
Powerful stuff. So let's talk about stages of change. Is presumably named after the model, stages of change model.
Yep.
For people who aren't familiar with that, I think that's really interesting and applies a lot to soft tissue therapists who are looking to try and bring about some kind of behavioural change, whether it's for rehabbing or trying to improve just performance or daily function. Can you talk us through that model, what the different kind of stages are?
So it was first proposed by two psychologists, Prochaska and Di Clementi, and they hypothesized that when people go through changes, they go through these different stages. And so the initial stage is pre-contemplation. So if somebody's a pre-contemplator, they are not thinking about change. And the classic example of this, because it was first proposed for smoking cessation and has since been used in other addictive behaviors, but also more so recently, obesity and exercise. So a pre-contemplator isn't thinking about it. So if we go back to the smoker, if you know anybody that's a smoker, if you were to say to them, well, you don't want to be smoking, it gives you cancer, lung cancer and all this, they will go, yeah, I know all that. And it will just go in and out the other. They're in pre-contemplation. They don't want to change. And anything you say will not make them change. Because if you look at smoking as a classic example, some of the biggest smokers in the early days, when a lot of this information was coming forward, were doctors and nurses, but they weren't stopping smoking. So they knew what the risks were, but so what? They were pre-contemplators, not interested. The next stage is contemplation. Now, if you look at another psychological model, which is the decisional balance model from Janis and Mann, they propose that whenever any of us make a decision in life, we take a balance sheet approach in our head, somewhere deeply subconscious, whatever, but we weigh up the pros and cons. And so we put it into two lists. And if the pros outweigh the cons, we go for it. If the cons outweigh the pros, we don't. And if the pros and cons are about equal, that is described as ambivalence. And so that's contemplation. We don't know which way we're going to go. We could go back to pre-contemplation, not thinking about it at all, or we could move forward into what is a stage that was added later, which is called preparation. Preparation is a fairly short stage, 6, 12 weeks, something like that. And as it kind of says on the tin, we're preparing to make the change. We're kind of starting to do some of the things that might facilitate a change. Ultimately, we then move into action. And then if the program is particularly good, relevant, and does everything we need it to, ultimately we move into maintenance, where we're able to maintain whatever the new behavior is. So that's the spectrum. And the one kind of elephant in the room with behavior change is relapse. And no matter where you are on that spectrum of change, you can relapse at any point. And you can relapse from maintenance right back into pre-contemplation, or you might relapse back into contemplation. So you can relapse from anywhere on the stage, basically back to anywhere else in the stage. But it's something we need to be aware of, because when any of us make a change to any behavior, we will normally have to have a go at it 3 or 4 or 5 times. Typically in smoking, takes 5 or 6 attempts for people to stop smoking. And so what's happening is they're moving through those stages. At some points they have a relapse because something upsets the apple cart, whether it be personal life, business, finances, bad day at the office, whatever. But anyway, they relapse back. Mm-hmm. And then it might take months, even a year or so, before they then think, I'm stopping again. And away we go again. So each iteration, though, we learn something new. And so we can apply that right across the board. Now, you might think, and this was my kind of thinking when I started my research, that if somebody takes on a personal trainer or comes to you as a therapist, surely then they're in preparation or in action, because they've come to you, they want to work with you. My research highlighted that is not true. People will sometimes go to a trainer, to a therapist, when they're in contemplation even, or even pre-contemplation. If somebody else has sent them, if their GP has said, you need to go and see such and such, well, they're going to turn up begrudgingly because the GP sent them. They don't want to be there though. So you cannot make an assumption that a client is ready to change when they first come to you. And I think that's really important. And that's why something I want to kind of address when we look at the journey. It's like the first thing we need to understand when we see a client for the first time, where are they on this stages of change journey? Because if they're not in the right place, I don't care how good a therapist you are, how good a communicator you are, or how lovely a person you are, you will not get that person to change. All the research shows that you cannot on your own get somebody who's a pre-contemplator, contemplator to suddenly become in action, and away we go. So it's very important we understand where the client is, because then we can help them move from that position to a point where they are ready to change. And that's where having the motivational interviewing skills comes in, because if they are in pre-contemplation, I can then work and use all my motivational interviewing skills to move them to a point where they're ready to change. Now, that might not happen in the first session. I might have to do a couple of sessions with that client before they're psychologically ready to move forward and start looking at their nutrition, their exercise, whatever it might be. So that's where stages of change fits into the picture.
Oh, there's so much in that. I feel like we should just like be silent for 5 minutes, let people listen to the podcast, just digest that, because I'm hoping people, particularly soft tissue therapists, can after hearing that, can think of particular clients or patients you've got. I mean, I think the pre-contemplation is so interesting because we know, again, because of studies, that a lot of our role as therapists now, we're moving away from the kind of operator model into the facilitator. And part of that means we're going to have to educate, which is why we need these skills of being able to educate and coach. And to do that, we need to listen. But on a business model, we do have people who turn up who are not ready to be educated. They're just there to get a nice massage, and yet they're coming to you in pain. They're coming to you, and they're going to need a lifestyle change, and you know that, but they don't yet, or maybe they're just really not prepared to make that lifestyle change. And I would say there's a lot of mystery over what causes injuries, but I think one of the most common factors, if you really want to get out of that, cumulative injury cycle, you're going to need a lifestyle change, whether it's more sleep or better nutrition or a combination of lots of things. And where you are in terms of being able to make that change is huge. The rest of it, like you say, what you do to that client, with that client, is by the by, if you don't help them identify that they are in a state of mind where they're not going to do anything that you listen to. Amazing stuff. I'm really interested in people who are listening to the live in the live audience as well, if you can relate to that, because they're the clients you're going to lose if they come in that state of mind and they walk out in it. They're not going to come back and see you. So as a business model, you're failing, because you probably failed to turn a customer who could change a little bit and move into the contemplation stage and come back and see you again. I guess there's not many rebooks with a pre-contemplation client coming in, is there?
Well, I point out to personal trainers, I said, there is a real danger if you take on clients that are in pre-contemplation and you don't have the skills to move them forward to a point where they're psychologically ready. Firstly, they will drop out of your program. They won't come back for treatment, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, they'll damage your business, because when somebody says to them, "Oh, you went to see a therapist, didn't you? How'd you get on?" "Oh, he was rubbish. He didn't tell me what to do. Right? He didn't give me the right exercises. He didn't understand me." Now, none of that will be true, but that's their perception. And unfortunately, you're not there to put the other side of the story. You're not standing there going, "Well, actually, I did tell you this, and I gave you this, and I asked you if you do that." You don't get that. You just get the client basically saying, "That's rubbish, don't go to him." And so that's damaging to your business. So even just from a business point of view, taking on a client in pre-contemplation without the skills to move them to at least contemplation preparation, you're on a hide into nothing. And I like what you say about lifestyle, because my mantra when I work in obesity, because my specialization, my PhD is treatment of male obesity. My mantra is, when I meet a client, it's your lifestyle that got you fat, and only changing that lifestyle is going to get you thin again. And if you can't buy into that, we shouldn't be working together anyway, because that ultimately is what's going to underpin anything. And it's the same for you guys. If somebody's coming to you injured, in pain, whatever, well, then their lifestyle must have led to that. And much as you can remedy it or whatever, if you don't get them to make lifestyle changes, well, they'll just repeat that cycle again, and they'll be back again in 3 months with the same injury or whatever, because they carried on doing what they were doing, and that's what got them in there in the first place. So when I work in elite sport, that's particularly relevant, because when you've got an athlete that's not performing, you kind of have to look at, well, what are the lifestyle factors that kind of led to this poor performance? Because that's what we need to change. Otherwise, we'll just reiterate, and we don't want that.
That's so interesting and so important about the people, what you say, people going away and kind of basically bad mouthing your business, which is probably not down to you in the sense that you didn't give them that impression, but you haven't managed to identify that stage of mind they're in. And okay, so obviously my question now, I'm getting very excited. People listening, you're gonna have to jump in there with questions, because I've got about 50 in here now. Is there, I mean, obviously it's not an overnight thing, but okay, so you've identified that pre-contemplation state of mind, stages of mind, and what are some of the sort of things, it depends on the individual, but what are some of things which could work? So that if that person, you've got 45 minutes where you're seeing them, they're going to be lying down for massage, so that's already quite a nice door opener. But what are some of the things which you could be applying if you've looked into it, looked into motivational interviewing?
Right. Well, if motivational interviewing is split into specific phases, the initial phase is engagement, which all of us do every time, regardless of how well you know that client. You should always re-engage, and you can kind of think of it as making sure we're still on the same page, because if you haven't seen that client for a week, 2 weeks, loads of things could have changed. So it's really important to engage every time, just to make sure that nothing else has changed since the last visit. And if it's a first visit, well, then obviously you want to understand everything about that client in terms of not just their physiology, but actually their environment, their lifestyle, their nutrition, everything else. Once we've got good engagement, the next stage is what we call focus. And focus is, what are we going to work on? Now, if it's an injury, there could be loads of facets. It could be the pain, it could be the rehab, it could be the nutrition, whatever. So you kind of have to be very clear with the client and kind of, in this case, maybe put forward some ideas. We could look at this, we could look at this, we could look at this. Out of those, which one sounds like it'll be most beneficial to you? Now, it's really important that I offer choice and then let the client make the choice, because now I'm respecting their autonomy and they feel involved in the process. Whereas if I just go, right, well, the focus is this and what you need to do is this, that's me, that's my writing reflex, that's me going, this is what we're going to do. And much as the client will nod, because you're the expert, so they're like, oh, well, yeah, whatever, the chances of them really taking on board what you're now going to tell them, pretty slim. Whereas if they're involved and you've given them choice, and they may well, when you've given them choice, they may well say to you, well, they all sound really interesting. Which one do you think is most important? That's perfect, because now they've said, I'm giving you the right to choose the one that's best. And so now you can proceed. So now we know what we're working on. The next stage is what we call evoking. And evoking is finding the client's reasons as to why they might make that change. So if we were talking about, I don't know, torn hamstring and how we're going to rehabilitate that and what is going to be necessary during the week for them to do, we would then say, kind of ask specific, what we would call evocative questions. And rather than me just going, well, you need to do this exercise twice a day, morning and evening, whatever, I would ask them about the injury itself and how it impacted them and what difference it would make if they could clear that injury up. And they might go, well, if my hamstring was repaired, I might be able to get back to running or riding a horse or whatever it might be. And then I'd ask them, and why is that important to you? Oh, well, I love that. That's how much. And so after a few questions like though, it's a very quick example, what you're hearing is all their reasons for change. And so now I can give them that all back. So you've said you want to do this and it's important because of that. And it's important because of that. Shall we now look into how we might go about that? Now they've heard all their own voices saying it's important, I need to, I want to, or whatever. We are now ready to move into planning, because they're kind of game on. They can think, yeah, I need this plan because I want all those things. And really that's the kind of crux of motivational interviewing. It's going through it process at a time, not skipping any of the processes, and at all times listening to the client and respecting their autonomy.
Amazing. Brilliant. I hope you're taking notes, people. So much in there to unpack, and it's stuff which I guess part of getting better of it is just practicing it bit by bit. I guess you're not going to get a master of it straight away, and you might get a few things wrong, but the more you practice it, I guess the more it becomes second nature. You're not having to go through this kind of unconscious competence, if you like, where you know you can't do something. I guess eventually it becomes second nature and you're doing it without thinking about it too much.
It's surprising how quickly some people pick it up. Obviously, like any skill, some people pick it up very quickly, others it takes perseverance, but it's definitely worth persevering. But I've had trainers do the workshop, and the one that always sticks in my mind is because he posted on Facebook on the Monday afternoon, He said, oh, I've had this really awkward client, but I used the skills we've learned on the workshop, and now she's really on board and wants to move forward or whatever. And I said to him, I said, she was never an awkward client. I says, it was the way you were communicating with her that was putting barriers up. And now you've changed your style of communication, all those barriers have come down. And he said, oh, I've never thought of it like that. So often we say, I've got an awkward client or somebody that's not compliant or someone that's very difficult to work with. Well, in motivational interviewing terms, we call that resistance. In other words, they're kind of pushing back against the expert.
Mm-hmm.
It takes two to have resistance. And as the therapist, you're part of that. So much as you can say, well, she's an awkward or he's an awkward client, it might just be the way you're trying to work with that client that consequently makes them an awkward client. And if you change the way you work with that client, you might end up with a very different scenario.
Excellent points. Lindsay here, before I forget, Lindsay makes a point here saying, I have a client that I massage weekly. Someone said to him, well, she can't be very good if you keep going back each week. He'd failed to tell them that he was sleeping in his car 5 nights away as he was working, next section, and he was working away and only actually getting about 4 hours sleep a night while still training 7 days a week. So I guess all that information, I wonder how long it took you, Lindsay, to get all that information. Did he say straight away, did he admit to you when he came to in the first 10 minutes, I'm sleeping in my car? Or did that take a little bit of kind of dialogue and listening and to get him to open up about that? But yeah, getting the whole picture, so important.
And that is a good example of possibly poor engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we'd have had good engagement right at the start, and a lot of the, and not just a question and answer, because often that's the way we start. And I see this in personal training. They kind of get people to sign a PAR-Q. They've maybe got a lifestyle questionnaire. So they spend the first half hour getting them to fill out loads of questions. And then they only spend 10, 15 minutes talking about what they might do or how they might move forward. And actually, they'd have been better off spending that first 40 minutes, 45 minutes, just having a conversation, good engagement, reflecting. And what you'll find is the more you reflect, the more information you get. And you most probably at the end of 40 minutes end up with a lot more information than was on your form. And the information you've got is the important stuff as well. So I think getting used, trusting that good engagement will allow you to fill the forms in afterwards is the way to go, I think.
What do you think about, because I think one of the potential pitfalls for people who get into this and start understanding the importance of the subjective and listening and giving the client more time and kind of opening up avenues of conversation, there's a danger, and this happens, I remember it happened to me a few times when I was kind of getting on board with all of this importance of education and listening, that the client's not conscious, but they've been chatting away for 30 minutes and they've only got maybe a quarter of an hour left, and they actually came in for a 45-minute massage. And it's only when they realize they've only got 10 minutes that they suddenly either don't come back or go, no, I booked in for a 45-minute massage. So you have got to be careful, haven't you, about checking that the individual in front of you is ready to spend that sort of time on talking.
You have, and I would lay out the scenario before I even start. I am going to spend the first 30 minutes of our session just getting to know you, getting to know your background, because I really need to understand you as a person before I can even contemplate treating you in any way, in the most appropriate way. Are you all right with that? So I'm respecting their autonomy. The other thing I do, and I say to them, I'm going to set a timer. And when that timer goes off, that'll be our 30 minutes and we'll decide what we're going to do at that point. Are you okay with that? Now, the reason I do that is I then don't have to clock watch, because I just know that alarm will go off. I've told the client what it is, so they're expecting it as well. And so now I can just concentrate 100%. I can actively listen and not be thinking, well, I've only got 5 minutes. I've got to get to this point. And so I always do that as well. So they're kind of two little things from the outset. No, I'd be very surprised if it's a client that genuinely wants to heal themselves, get better, whatever it fitter, whatever it might be, that a client would turn around and go, well, no, that's a waste of time. I just need a massage. And so a similar scenario, personal trainers will say to me, because I always say you should psychometrically test clients before you start with them. And a couple have said to me, well, what if they don't want to complete the psychometric test? I said, don't work with them then. I said, that is a prerequisite for you working with a client. And if they don't want to complete psychometric tests, there's a hint straight away that maybe they're not ready to change because they want to do it on their terms and maybe don't understand what's involved in making a psychological behavior change. So it's a similar scenario when you point out to the client, I need this 30 minutes so as we understand. It might go quicker, we might get through it quicker, but I want to assign that a block of time to make sure we're on the same page. Are you okay with that? Like I said, 9 times out of 10, they'll go, sure.
Psychometric tests. Some people have just looked up from their padding on, what did he say? Psychometric tests? What's this all about? So yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, if it's somebody who's come to you looking at it from a soft tissue perspective, somebody who says, I need to get out of this pain, I've been in pain for a long time, and that's a sign that they're, they need to make a change. Or maybe they are looking for performance gains, they want to get their PB or something. They're all flags that maybe a psychometric test would be cool. So how do you go about doing that?
Well, there are specific psychometric tests for specific scenarios. So I've got a whole bank of tests that are specifically designed for weight management. There's one in there for physical activity as well, actually. So there are psychometric tests for most scenarios, but that all sounds a bit scientific, a bit whizzy, but actually you can do a very simple kind of similar process just using a decisional balance sheet. And basically what you do there is you get people to record all their pros for changing, all the things that will be good if they were to clear up their injury, get rid of the pain, whatever. And then when they've listed all their pros, you would then put that sheet face down so they can't see it. Have a coffee, chat, distract them for 5 minutes, or maybe get them to do this on their own, actually, is often a better idea. You then say to them, now I want you to record all the cons for changing, all the things that are going to be negative. And it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. If you think they're negative, put it down. So they might go, oh, I've got to give up too much time to doing these extra exercises. I can't be bothered to change diet. I don't have the time to healthy, or whatever it might be. But they'll list all their cons. So that will be how we make decisions in the moment, those two lists. Now, you could just leave it there, because if the pros outweigh the cons, then that's telling you they're good to go. If they're about the same, then they need some work. And very often you can look at some of the cons and go, do you know what? That's not actually true. Would you be interested in hearing what actually happens and blah, blah. So sometimes you can discount some of the cons for them, as long as you do it in the right way with education. I take that one step further, though, and then I say to them, right, now what I want you to do is I want you to imagine a scenario 6 months to a year down the line where you do nothing. You don't try and rehabilitate this injury. You just put up with it, carry on living with it. I now want you to list all the pros for that. And 9 times out of 10, they really struggle because it's pretty hard to think of things that are going to be in favor of sticking with the injury. Similar thing, cover that sheet up. And the covering the sheet up is really important, because if you've got the sheet in front of you, what people will do is they'll try to match out their reasons. It's kind of human nature. So it's actually quite important to do this as separate entities. And then the final part is, okay, 6 months to a year down the line, if you don't rehabilitate this, treat it properly, whatever, what are the cons going to be? And that normally that's a big list. Oh, well, I'm going to be in further pain. I won't be able to play with the kids, whatever it might be. Now, the reason that is so useful is often just doing that exercise is enough to help people shift their decisional balance, because most of us make decisions in the moment and we don't think about the consequence of those decisions in the future. And so by getting them to go through that process, it helps get more of a perspective on maybe why they should consider doing something about it.
Excellent. I love the little details, which sound so simple but can make such a difference, like turning the page over. It's there's so much in there. It's great stuff. And Becky makes a point here, very valid point, as we expect from our Becky. Says psychometric testing may put off dyslexic clients. How do you get around this?
Yeah, I totally get that, but there's nothing to stop you reading the questions out to them. And then, because generally 9 times out of 10, most psychometric tests are either yes, no answers, or they're scoring on a Likert scale, 0 to 9. So in terms of, like a pain scale, basically, with 0 being I'm 100% healthy and 9 being I'm in severe pain. So most psychometric tests work around that type of area. So there's no reason you couldn't read the questions for the client and record their answers, as long as you don't give any other input. Because what often happens with a psychometric test is the questions are often worded quite strangely. And so if you're there, and this is why I prefer clients to do it on their own, if you're there, the client will go, oh, but what does that mean? What do you mean by that? Now, if you give any input in terms of, well, what it means is this, this, and this, you are already influencing the answer. And so if you are having to read the questions for your client, my stock answer would be, and I tell them right at the start, don't query any of the questions, just answer. And there's no right or wrong here. Because, and then whenever they say, oh yeah, but what does that really mean? I would just simply go, it means whatever you think it means, and leave it at that. Because if I add any more, I bias their answer, and then I don't get a true reflection of what's going on at a subconscious level.
We can see, listening to you, how there's so much, why there are courses to do this. There's so many little different scenarios and changes, and it's, yeah. Great question though, Becky. Really cool question.
I've got, there's an e-learning workshop with all the psychometric tests in there for weight loss and what have you, but each one is explained, but I also explain what the data means as well, in terms of when you've scored this, what the hell does it mean? What do I do with this data? So that workshop explains all that, those type of details, really.
Perfect. Right, well, look, it's 8:53 already. So, and this is all stuff which you're going to be presenting and talking about in the STA Theatre. Well, let's just check, because you are there for 2 days. I don't want to, because I think it's great you are there for 2 days. Let me just bring up details of when you are there. I did have it all wonderfully prepared here.
Yeah, I think the first day is on the main stage, and that's talking about communication.
So yes, we have. I've got the times here, people. So if you're listening to the podcast, I'll just put this on the screen. So yes, Dr. Gary Mendoza, Managing Director, Stages of Change Limited. So sessions, we've got the 23rd of November, which is day one, which is the Wednesday at Therapy Expo. And that is going to be at 2:10 to 22. Why have I confused myself with 20 to 3? Okay, yeah, 2:10 to 2:40, that'll do. And that's in Theatre B, I believe, on the Wednesday. But then on the Thursday, Gary will be in the STA Theatre, which is out in the open, just opposite the STA stand, the Sports Therapy Association stand. And that, I don't know if you realise this, Gary, that you are the only speaker out of our 10 speakers, I think, who are getting 45 minutes. The rest are getting 30 minutes. So
better say something useful.
You better say something useful in there. So that's going to be for a full 45 minutes compared to the 30 minutes on the Wednesday. So, and it's going to be a really nice interactive chance for people to, there'll be loads of seating space. People walking by will be stopping and joining in as well. So it's going to be a fantastic networking event, which is what the STA Theatre is all about, to direct questions once Gary has given his presentation. So that's the one on the Thursday at 11:30 in the STA Theatre, which really looking forward to. So many people are fascinated and really want to meet you in person. So thanks again.
And I'll be about for both days. So certainly on the second day, I will hang around the STA stand. So if people want to have conversations beforehand or whatever, we can kind of do that more kind of in person, as it were.
Amazing. That would be great.
Catherine, it'll be good to meet you, Catherine, because Catherine did the course. So I kind of know Catherine via Zoom, but never met her face to face.
It's going to be lovely. There'll be loads of that. Last year was particularly kind of emotional because it was people, because of COVID and all that. But there's still lots of people we get, close to online, and then seeing them in person is just brilliant. You're kind of walking around looking at them like that and going, oh, it's you. And then you realise they've actually got arms and legs and they move. So yeah, it's going to be equally as emotional, I think, affect people equally.
Yeah, I had that scenario with Mike at Elevate. That was the first time I'd only ever spoken to Mike Rice via Zoom. So to meet him face to face was nice.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. It's really cool. And like I said, I think in a post the other day, we are losing this face to face interaction. we are heading towards that. Everyone stay at home and work and play at home and never go out. It's going to happen one day. But so we've got to try and delay it. So it's going to be really cool. Right, so just to repeat once again, if people are interested in hearing more about Dr. Gary Mendoza, then just head over to the website, stagesofchange.co.uk. Let's chuck this up on the screen again in case you're watching the video. Stagesofchange.co.uk. Loads of information on there you can look through. Like Gary said, there's a massive tab there for resources. There's the video I mentioned, the Action Behaviour Change Strategy, which introduces all the information you need about courses which are available. There's online courses where people can watch recordings and do it in their own time. Then you've also got an online recording which is interactive with you live, haven't you? Is that correct?
Yeah, that on the 2nd of October, I've got the next Behaviour Change in MI workshop, and I only ever have a maximum of 10 people on that because we need the interaction and the group work and what have you. So the next one starts on the 2nd of October, which is a Sunday, and we always do it 9. There's 3. It runs over 3 consecutive Sundays and runs from about 9 o'clock to about 12 o'clock. So it's 3 hours each session.
Amazing. I think I saw on your website maybe there's like 4 spaces left, or 3 or 4 spaces. I think I saw that.
I think on this one that's coming up, there's about 4 or 5. I think something.
Okay.
It's about half full, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, they normally sell out. I mean, people seem to leave it to the last minute. But
hey, lastminute.com. That's what we all do. So yeah, people, if you enjoyed what you've heard today, then that might be something worth investing in. The feedback I get from your courses, Gary, are just amazing people, and people who I know have been. I mean, Rachel Francis the other day from Biomechanics Education, and that she was singing your praises. I think she's done multiple courses. So, and she's somebody who's seen a lot and done a lot herself and gives courses. So it's always great feedback. But yeah, otherwise, it's all about Therapy Expo now, November 23rd, 24th in Birmingham. How far you got to travel to get to Birmingham, Gary?
Good 3-hour drive, 3.5 hours.
Not too bad. Birmingham, it's not the end of the world.
Fun and games up the motorway.
Yeah. And yeah, so really looking forward to that. Thank you very much for agreeing to do that again. Right, so 8:58. I'm going to sign off now. Gary, if you can hang around and don't click anything, I'll say thank you to you once we've closed down the live lounge. Thanks, people, for joining us again. Next week, before I let you go, and for those of you listening to the podcast as well, next week we continue our episodes with speakers at Therapy Expo this year. It's in no particular order. So next week we will be talking to STA friends Anna Maria Mazzieri, who a lot of you will know, has been on the show a few times, from the school and from Massage Matters, and also with her Paul Coker, who used to be medical director for Rock Tape. A lot of you know Paul through that. Now he's got his own Move Well clinic in Cornwall. Fantastic speaker, one of the speakers who I got the most. Please get Paul on again. So Paul and Anna are going to be doing a joint presentation, which I think is going to be absolutely brilliant. I mean, an Italian and a Scotsman together for half an hour is just going to be well worth turning up for. And they're going to be talking about massage and manual therapy, a modern view, which is going to be, they're going to open up the Thursday actually at Therapy Expo, and it's going to be an amazing way to start the day. So they're going to be on next week. If you want to join us live, as always, the Sports Therapy Association channel on YouTube, just go along there at 8 o'clock and we'll be there with Anna Maria Mazzieri and Paul Coker. So that's it. On behalf of Dr. Gary Mendoza and myself,
thanks
again
everybody
for joining us. And yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you next week live. Take care of each other.